the ever-present aspirin mother, you know, the overfeeding mother, this thing, the mother being the archetype for the nurturer. So, yeah, archetypally, the mother is the nurturer, but there's a dark side to that, although modern society doesn't seem to recognise that. There's a dark side to the mother, and it's chaos. She's the consumer, she's demanding, you know, it's all about me, and what I want. So you have to look at the nurturer in you and make sure that the nurturer in you is not chaotic, okay? And therefore it doesn't overfeed you, you know. Here, son, have some more cake. Oh, you look fat. Here, son, have some more cake. I've never heard that before. You know, it's that, the overfeeder. Yeah, it's chaotic. It's not the way to go. So be very, very aware of the nurturer that is in you, and how that nurturer treats you, and it hasn't lapsed into chaos, you know. And chaos also includes, you know, oh, poor you, poor thing, poor this, poor that, you know, that overindulgence. Yeah. You see it with children in playground. Child runs along and it falls over. He, she falls over. They fall over. Whatever. Fall over. And when they fall over, they look to the parent. Now, what happens next is dependent on the parent's reaction. If the parent goes, go on then, the child then gets up and just runs along. You know, could have be bleeding from its knee, doesn't care, just runs off. Yeah, the other parent where the example where the parent gets up and runs to the child and goes, my poor baby, oh, you poor thing, you poor thing. The child will instantly burst into tears. You can see it in any playground, any children's playground, yes. Obviously, you have to go there if you have a child. You can't be just experimenting with people. And you can see this happen. Okay, so yeah, it's the over nurturer. It is not a healthy thing. It tends towards chaos, complete chaos, victimization, overindulgence. You know, it is chaos. Fixation on, you know, things. This is chaos. So that's the nurturer in you. You've got to make sure that nurturer is bounded. It needs to be a healthy thing. So that's the nurturer. And then the other side to the equation that you need is structure. I suppose it's an archetypal provider, the supporter, which is archetypally invested in the male. But it can be tyrannical. So what you want is structure, yeah, that allows you to have goals, that allows you to move forward in your life and achieve the things that you want to achieve, and, you know, have purpose. But what you don't want is a tyrant, and so many people are tyrannical. They are abusive of themselves. They beat themselves up constantly, and yeah, they're absolute tyrants. You know, it's men and women. These things apply to both men and women. Okay, when self-parenting, you need to be both, and the tyrannical self-parent is really, I mean, astonishingly common. The terrible, appalling things that people say to themselves, the way they treat themselves, the way they bully themselves, just never ceases to amaze me. They wouldn't do it to a friend, they wouldn't do it to a loved one, they wouldn't do it to anybody except themselves, and they can be absolute tyrants. You could see, you know, the meekest and mildest of a person, you know, man or woman, and if you get an insight into their, you know, inner speak about themselves, they are bullying, vicious, mean, just awful to themselves, awful, absolute tyrants. Yeah, it's unacceptable. Okay, if you want to overcome your anxiety, it's unacceptable. So there's these two elements: yeah, the nurturer, yeah, and the structurer. I'm sure there's a better word for it. I'm just, making this up as I go along. And you have to find balance between the two that doesn't lend itself to chaos or tyranny. Yeah, but this doesn't end here. So you can deal with a whole bunch of, and I'm talking about conscious here, conscious anxiety through this method. Okay, you become your own parent, and that parent has to be, pardon me, on the money, as they say. Non-tyrannical, non-chaotic. The loving parent. You have to become your own loving parent. You are in your own care as an adult, and you have to do that. And you need to inspire children to do it as well. Otherwise, they're never going to be able to do it as adults. Children need to learn structure for themselves. They need to structure themselves. They need it. They don't need overindulgence. They don't need over-nurturing. They need balance between nurture and structure. They need both. Yeah. They need what is archetypally a masculine and feminine invested into them, so that they can become balanced human beings. Okay, so that's the beginning.
Sit us down for a moment.
Yeah. Okay. Back to the analysis of anxiety through an understanding of the archetypes. The archetypal thing is actually quite interesting to focus on. The archetypal thing is quite interesting because there's a real need to strike a balance between the two. So if you want to look at your anxiety, really look at the two archetypes, the masculine and feminine archetypes, the male and female archetypes. If you really want to get into it, look them up. Okay? And what you want is a balance between the two of them and the two positive sides of them, and you want to remove as much of the negative aspects of the two as possible. Now, you're never going to obviously achieve that fully because you're a human being and we're funny that way, but what you want to do is remove the negative aspects of the two. You have to be very careful with this. Okay, so when you're looking after yourself, it's the nurturer, but the nurturer is boundaried. It isn't overindulgent. It isn't fixated. It's that. Okay.
It's really basic, isn't it? It's sleep. It's getting the right food. It's getting the right rest, and it's getting an amount of stimulation.
And what about love, kindness, generosity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, a space to play.
Space to play. That's nice. I like that.
Be creative.
Creativity. Yeah. So there's all of that. Okay. But not compensatory, not indulgent. Yeah. The next one, obviously, is the masculine aspect which you're trying to embody. And this is the point, we're trying to embody both of them to give you balance, so that your anxiety is resolved. So you need the masculine element, but what you don't want is the tyrant. Now the tyrant, as I've mentioned earlier, is just pulls you down. What other aspects of the tyrant would you say, Suzanne?
Oh, it's dismissive and rejecting.
Dismissive, rejecting.
Disapproving.
Yeah. Sorry?
Disapproving.
Disapproving.
Perhaps non-engaging.
Non-engaging. Rejecting.
Imposition of will.
Sorry?
Imposition of will.
Ah, yeah. Now that's an interesting one. Yeah. The imposition of will. I like that. With all these things, for proper development to take place, it has to be done with consent. You can't force personal growth. You can't force change. There has to be consent. Without consent, it doesn't work. Okay, and I'm talking about with regard to adults. With children, there has to be an amount of push. But with regard to yourself, beating yourself up, bullying yourself in order to achieve the goal of enlightenment, so to speak, is just not going to work. Okay, so that's the negative aspect of the the masculine. You know, we can easily recognise it, I think, but lots of us kind of just ignore it, and we give it different names. We kind of call it, you know, well, motivation. Motivation isn't beating the crap out of yourself, excuse my language, but it isn't. Motivation has to have nurture in it, has to have care. Otherwise, you know, it doesn't really work. So I'm just crossing a road. So that's that. So that's the negative aspect, the tyrant. So what does the structure look like? If you're going to provide structure for yourself, what does it look like? Well, it obviously looks like consistency. Yes, predictability. Knowing what's going to happen from one day to the next. It's not this thing where people, anxious people have a tendency to think about situations before they arrive. They predict futures and then they try and sort those futures out in their heads. This is not good for you. This is not good for you at all. Because you're not relying on you in that moment dealing with the thing in that moment. Yeah. The structured structured masculine is reliable. Yeah, it provides for your safety, and therefore it's predictable. You can lean on it. It's supportive. It's these things, and it isn't worried about the future because it knows what it will do. Yeah, it doesn't have to think of every combination of every single thing that might happen. And then try and work out a resolution for that on the offset that it might happen. The structure is sufficient, such that the masculine is sufficient that in this situation, in any given situation, it knows what it will do in a general way, as in, I will look after me. Yes. I will not permit people to abuse me. I will not abuse myself. I will not be unkind to others. I will not be unkind to myself. It's that sort of thing. Therefore, those the sort of very wide-based ideas will resolve any problem. Yes, it's the ability to say no. Now there's one. Suzanne, would you go for the ability to say no as structure? Yeah?
Yes, the boundary.
It's the boundary, okay? It's the boundary. Now we have to understand that, you know, the masculine and feminine are not separate. Yes, they kind of, the snakes intertwined, or the yin and yang thing. The double helix. They are together. Yes, and they are together, and also there's a piece of each in the other. So they are not separate things, and the idea that they are separate things is a nonsense. It is a completely nonsensical thing. Anybody who says they're separate is an idiot. Okay, so the masculine and the feminine are conjoined twins, if you like. Yes, they share a nervous system. They belong together. They're not separate. And what we're talking about in resolving your anxiety is finding the best in both, and engendering and growing the best in both. And this will overcome your anxiety. Okay, to a degree. Okay, and I'll talk about the next piece of this beyond that.